Bunker Hill, Gettysburg, Normandy. They mean something. Bill Martinez, live.
You know, and at the bottom of all this is the facts. It's the truth. That's what we have to make sure, whatever it is we're dealing with, that, the facts and truth, that all the truth and fact dots are connected. And one big issue we've had here in this country has to do with climate change. As you know, progressives would want us to believe, well, that's old news. That's already been debated. Why are we bringing this up again? It's because they've already assumed victory and assumed that everybody in America, or at least the mandate of America, has approved and acknowledged that there is, global change, climate change. And they're moving on with their directives. And not only are they moving on with their directives, they're saying, look, for everybody else that doesn't agree with them, we're going to pull the full force of the law against you to make sure that you step in line and high step with everybody else. If not, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. Now, here to break it down for us and help us understand just how diabolical this whole situation has become is Professor Tom Harris. He's the executive director of the International Climate Science Coalition. Professor Harris, good to have you with us. How you doing, sir?
Oh, pretty good. How are you, Bill?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thank you for coming on and, keeping the truth out in front here because, the elites would want us to all drink the Kool-Aid and just, high step right along with them and saying, hey, look, we believe everything you've been telling us is the truth. And, boy, it's hard to reconcile the truth with the lies that they're thrusting upon we the people.
Oh, yeah. And, in fact, the sad thing is they're trying to scare people out of actually looking at the real data. The climate scare is not based on what's currently happening. It's based on what might happen according to computer models in the future. It's funny because 2014, they said it's the hottest year on record. First of all, the record's only since the late 1800s. But you know how much it set the record by? This is amazing. It set the record by 7/100th of a degree. And that got headlines all over the world. What people didn't realize is that the uncertainty in the measurement is 14/100ths of a degree. So, in other words, it set the record by less than the uncertainty. And 2015 was a little better. It set the record by 1/4 of a degree. So these changes are tiny. And the same thing with sea level rise. It's, 7 inches per century. There's no increase in extreme weather, although there's a lot more increase in reporting. So if you actually look at the current data, there is no climate crisis.
Tom, they're putting their thumb on the scale. They're rigging the system. I mean, this is what progressives do. And, when is there going to be a loud enough voice or somebody to kind of, hit them in the forehead and say, look, enough of this silliness. You guys, you've turned this into a whole new industry. You've wasted the people's money. You have rewarded, other professors and research analysts and that sort of thing, and you've paid them to give you the information that you want, and you've used the people's money to do that. When is there enough of this now, this whole game that they're doing?
Well, one of the problems is the funding going to the environmental movement for climate change is unbelievable. I mean, in 2008, for example, the Climate Works Foundation received a grant of over $500 million. That was their startup funding. I mean, most groups like that, they start up with $1,000 to volunteers. This group, Climate Works Foundation, who actually helped fund Al Gore's group, they started up, their startup funding was $500 million. And in fact, ever since, they're getting tens of millions more every year. So it's kind of hard to defeat a group like that when climate skeptics are getting like 1/100th of that. It's quite funny because, when Peabody went out of business, like you were just saying, there were criticisms that some of the people on their list were actual skeptics. Well, the amount going to them was trivial. I mean, it was, as they say, 1/100th or less of what goes to the climate alarm. And also, Peabody were funding people like Ducks Unlimited and the Sierra Club and the Democratic Party. So apparently it's only bad if you're funding one side but not the other.
Exactly. Well, and speaking of the Sierra Club, the president of the Sierra Club was quite embarrassed, and he should have been, when Ted Cruz exposed him, in that Senate hearing. All he could say was 97% of the scientists agree. Well, that's not even true.
Well, no. In fact, you have to ask, what do the 97% of scientists agree to? Well, actually, 100% of scientists agree that there is climate change. And 97% agree that we contribute to it. But none of that is the question. You know, across the world right now, they're spending over $1 billion a day on climate science. And the only way that could be justified is if the amount of climate change we're causing is dangerous. If you actually ask scientists behind closed doors, do you think our carbon dioxide emissions will someday cause dangerous climate change? Almost invariably they say, I don't know.
Yeah, but here it is. We're dumping an inordinate amount of money to research this. It's all prejudiced. And again, I go back to the fact of it's the people's money. And I think that whenever you use the people's money, forgive me, but I think there ought to be a return on investment. But there's no accountability. Oh, yeah. We just drop it into this dark hole. Is it any wonder we're looking at $19-20 trillion in debt, and we continue just to throw money at all these different whimsical things that the elites can come up with and try to force a round peg in a square hole? But that's, again, you know, I'm looking for a voice of reason that tells them, stop. You know, what are you doing? You cannot irresponsibly spend the people's money like this.
ICSC, the group lead, is nonpartisan, so we're not supporting any candidate. But I will say that what Donald Trump is doing is a big step forward. He's not afraid to say, look, the idea that, you know, we're causing this dangerous problem is a hoax. I mean, it really is a hoax to say that we know the future of climate. We can't really forecast weather in 2 weeks. So people are saying, well, then weather's part of climate. How do you forecast climate in 50 years? So, I mean, I think Trump is doing an enormous service to the American public by bringing up the topic and not being so afraid of political correctness.
Well, they've turned this into, a climate religion, and that's the thing, and they're forcing people into it. And, you know, kind of interesting that there's supposed to be a separation of church and state, but they've brought in their own church that somehow accommodates their political interests.
Yes, and in fact, some of our scientists have had death threats, if you can imagine that. I mean, you hear about stories of, you hear about professors being fired and people being told, you know, you can't be in the X party, whatever that party is, unless you buy the climate scare. Here in Ontario, for example, the official opposition to our government is actually trying to have just a different kind of carbon tax. And I met with them the other day, and I say, look, you're just asking the people to choose between being hung or shot. I mean, I don't think that's a very good choice. So, I mean, I think that's where Trump is actually doing something that really is needed in many other countries, is you need to have a real choice. And there certainly is right now. And there's an interesting study that was done out of Yale and McGill universities, and they showed that when the elite, when the leaders in society are skeptical, the public follow. A lot of Republicans think they cannot be skeptical because they have to follow public opinion. But in fact, this study, which came out a couple of years ago, showed that the public opinion is largely led by people like the Republican Party. So if they want to ever get out of this climate scare, then they're going to have to start doing what Trump is doing.
It's called leadership, you know, Tom. It's, you know, the difference between where we are and where we need to be is when leadership is required, and that's been the problem. And this is what America is aching for, is somebody who can lead the way and, call it for what it is and encourage us to get to that point where we need to be, where everybody is better served. There's been a lack thereof. We've been run by polls and, elites that have their own agendas, and any wonder that 7 out of 10 Americans say we're on the wrong track today.
Oh, totally.
No big surprise. Professor Tom Harris, Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition. Professor Harris, good to have you back with us, and we need to have you back more often, okay? So let's get it on our calendars. This is Bill Martinez. We're live at 29 minutes after the top of the hour.